Hello, BookTube. I'm here with another tag. I did the horror book tag, and I had to sort of define what I class as horror. This one, it's a popular saying. People say sci-fi. Uh, I say science fiction or SF. Sci-fi to me is something different than SF, and I will need to explain that, and I'll start. And don't take my word for it. We'll use John Clute's and Peter Nichols's Encyclopedia Science Fiction. Now, he describes. Uh, I'm just going to turn off notifications here so I don't get disturbed. He describes SF as the preferred. What says it? SF pronounced SF, the preferred abbreviation of science fiction within the community of SF writers and readers, as opposed to the journalistic sci-fi. In this volume, as often elsewhere, it is rendered in lowercase letters. Well, that's just sort of a brief thing. It's gone now from journalistic. It just seems to be popular, and I sort of detest it as personally. So I'm being pedantic here, I know, but I have a right to be, as anybody does. Now, here's the definition of sci-fi. Sci-fi, pronounced sci-fi or sci-fi, an abbreviation for science fiction, said to have been introduced by Forrest J. Ackerman, a prominent fan fond of words play in the 1950s when the term hi-fi was becoming popular. Never much used within It's never much used within the SF community. The term became very popular with journalists and media people generally until about the 1970s. It was the most common abbreviation used by non-readers of SF to refer to the genre, often with an implied sneer. Some critics within the genre, Terry Carr and Damon Knight among them, decided that since the term was derogatory, it might be critically used to distinguishing SF hack work, particularly ill-written, lurid adventure stories from SF of a more intellectually demanding kind. Around 1978, the critic Susan Wood and others began pronouncing the term skiffy. In 1980s to 90s, usage skiffy, which sounds friendlier than sci-fi, has perhaps for that reason came to be less condemnatory. Skiffy is colorful, sometimes entertaining junk SF. Star Wars is skiffy. Perfectly agree with that. So I will not be using the term, I will not be talking about sci-fi. In this booktube, I will be talking about SF. So there's the distinction. Now, if that was too pedantic, well, turn it off, go away. But that's how I do it. Okay, now there's how many questions are there here? There's 10 questions. What is your SF? What is your SF origin story? How you came to read your first SF novel? That might be a little different. It could very, like, the thing that I think it might be would been from watching Star Trek on TV or reading in some comics. Then wanting me to read science fiction, and I can't for the life of me remember what uh, first novel that I read. I would have been probably under 10, well, around 10 to 15, I suppose, maybe. And then I really didn't really get into reading heavily until I was in my late teens and early 20s. But I can't remember for the life of me. I know, like, early writers were Isaac Asimov, Ray Bradbury, well, Clifford D. Simak, which is probably my favorite writer of science fiction. Not to say that his stuff is the best of everybody else. He's my favorite writer. There's another distinction there. But yeah, so it would have been like a lot of A.E. Van Vogt. I remember seeing and reading at the time, very early on, and many others. I can't pinpoint an exact author or novel or time. Number two, if you could be the hero slash heroine in a SF novel, who would be the author, and what's one trope you'll insist be in the story? Uh, I guess it would have to be Clifford Simak that would write it, but I don't know. He's dead, so I'm not sure how that could be done. I find these sort of questions weird. You can tell they're written for very young people. I think that go into sort of cosplay possibly and stuff like that. So I don't think of me being in a as a hero of a novel in any shape or form. But let's pretend. And so yeah, so I would be like something like in Clifford a Simak story where I'd be sort of just a General Joe or something like that, and come encounter with aliens or possibly tinker around with something and create a time machine. That's that's putting it really basic, but that's a lot of his stories. Or like I would like in Way Station, for instance, Enoch Wallach to be immortal when he's in his house in the caverns below, and he can read and he converses with aliens, and he's isolated, but he's got aliens as friends. So anything like that would be fine. Trope wise, I can't think of anything. Number three, what is an SF you've read this year that you want more people to read? Well, Clifford Simak. I would like people to read more Clifford Simak, maybe even James B. Hogan. It'd be nice to have them come back. What is your favorite SF subgenre? What subgenre have you not read much from? I've read from all the genres, I would say, unless there's something new that's come out. But favorite genre. Well, I guess. I suppose because for Simak it would be pastoral. Would be and like Ray Bradbury style of writing. But I also like the hard science fiction, so-called for Isaac Asimov's Foundations, sort of future history, uh, Dune. I guess the class is hard science fiction, and what's being put around now, and which I've read I think 3 times the whole series, is the Hyperion Cantos. That's pretty hard science fiction, but it's also another subgenre we'll get to in a moment. But yeah, that's the thing. But I can't think of anything that I haven't read much from. Oh, I guess no, I've even read a lot of, well, not recent stuff, but stuff that could be considered sci-fi or skiffy. Like I do enjoy reading the 20s sort of space opera stuff that don't have much more in it than just the thrill. There's really no story to. Well, there's a story, but there's no depth to it. It's just it's Star Wars type stuff, but it's done then. I can't really handle too much of the more recent stuff done that way because anyway. Who is one of your autobuy SF authors now? Well, there's no one left alive, I don't think, that I really read. I've lost touch with more recent, and when I say more recent science fiction, I'm talking about more or less in the last 30 years, 30 to 40 years, because I still read people during the 80s and maybe a little bit during the 90s, but at that point, by 1990 or sometime in the 90s, most of everybody that I was reading had died. And the only person that sort of, I think, still writing is Dan Simmons. But he doesn't always write science fiction. And I do want to read more of his books, even his horror, I wouldn't mind reading. But and his non-horror. But I can't put anybody. But I suppose if anything comes out Like Clifford Simak, obviously, I would grab, whether it's a collection or new editions or something like that. Then yeah, I probably would. Um, Number 6, how do you typically find SF recommendations? And then it's got in brackets: Goodreads, YouTube, podcasts, or Instagram. Uh I don't. I'm on. I'm on Goodreads, but I don't participate too much, and I don't put the books on that I read. Suppose I should be having a book on there, and but I don't interact too much on there. That's a fault. YouTube, possibly. I watch a lot of BookTube, so if somebody does talk about a book that I haven't read, um, or something new that sounds interesting, then I would potentially do that, but I've yet to find something that's found interesting. Podcasts, I don't really listen to too many science fiction podcasts. What I did listen to, because I have listened, it was a very good podcast, Steve. It was the one about the John W. Campbell that you did. That was really good that you did. You're doing a podcast, but it's not always science fiction. But I did find the John W. Campbell one interesting. Instagram, I'm on Instagram, so I do see science fiction's books pop up there. Most of the time, if they're old stuff, I've read it. But new stuff, I haven't seen anything that's caught my eye again. But those, like, I suppose it would be BookTube and Instagram. Out of those would be where I would see something, and possibly Twitter. Um, what is an upcoming SF release you're excited about? There's nothing that I know that's coming out. I think, well, there's a few that are out that I do want to get. I found out I think there's a 3-volume bio of Ray Bradbury, so I'm lumping that in with SF because he was an SF writer. But there's nothing else that I'm aware of that is coming out. I know there's a lot of books that are coming out in science fiction, uh, but I don't know. I don't know them, so I may not. I'm definitely not the target for this tag, but I'm adapting it as best as possible. Number 8. What is one misconception about SF you would like to lay to rest? Well, SF, science fiction, and fantasy, to me, are different things. They can intermingle, but they're different. Science fiction is based on science, whether it turns out to be bad science later, that's a bit different, but it's based on the scientific method. Fantasy isn't. It's things that are conjured out of nowhere, and doesn't really fit in with the scientific world as such. However, you can have you can do science within, and have magic, science be a basis of magic. So there is blending, but in general terms, I think they're two different genres. And I'm definitely not a huge reader of fantasy, so I'm not too familiar with a lot of the writers. I've read some, and I know some science fiction writers have dabbled in fantasy, and so has Clifford Simak, and I've read those and enjoyed them enough. Um, Now, number 9, if someone had never read an SF before, I guess it means an SF novel or short story before, and asked you to recommend the first 3 books that came to mind as places to start, what would those recommendations be? Uh, it's hard to say because some people just don't. It's really hard to say because everyone that I could think of, like I would say City by Clifford Simak, but it's got talking dogs, and that makes me go, oh, that's stupid. Because it depends on the person. Or Waste Station would be another one by Clifford Simak, but there's aliens in it. Not so much, but they're part of the story. I would say Dune would be a great one to start, because, especially if somebody has previously read and enjoyed sort of literature and things like that, it's probably the closest. If not, it is literature. Like it's approaching, literature. And I mentioned again uh, the Hyperion. Hyperion would be a great one to start too. Like these are like City and Waystation are easy books to read. Um, but Dune and Hyperion have a little more depth to, well, a lot more depth to them, and they're a bit more challenging. So those would be my three, I suppose. So let's say City, Dune, and Hyperion. City by Clifford Simak, Dune by Frank Herbert, and Hyperion by Dan Simmons. And the last question, number 10: who is the most recent SF reading content creator you came across that you would like shout out? There's quite a few that do it, but I like Noah at. You have such a long name for your channel. Uh, Whoever reads it must converse, I think. Um, and he's been doing a series, like he's reading through the Hyperion for the first time, and I envy him because I can never have that pleasure again. I've read it 3 times, but then every reading after that is a pleasure because I see more in it, and that's how great it is. And I think it was the same for Dune as well. So Dune I've read through 3 times, I think, as well. Um, and again, I still see more in it, and the same is with um, the Foundation Future History. But yeah, he's doing a series now on sort of like what he's classing as philosophical science fiction, and he compared the Dune series with the Hyperion, or he's doing the comparison with those, and it's an interesting comparison, and I really like it. I don't agree with everything that you say, Noah, but I don't need to. I don't need to. That's not the purpose of it. It's whatever people say stuff. It's challenging, and it creates a dialogue, and that's the way it is. Because if I just agreed with everything that everybody said, I'd be just going. I wouldn't say anything other than saying, "Yeah, I agree." That's it. But if I don't agree, or I think there's something else to add to it, and the same as somebody else, let's discuss, and let's discover some new things together. And that's what I like about BookTube, and especially your videos, Noah. So I'll put a link to his channel. Um, everyone who reads it must converse. I think. Yeah. Sorry, I just forget the name of your channel fully. But yeah, so I really enjoy those, and I look forward because I've mentioned to him the James P. Hogan the Giant series. I think would be great to add into that kind of thing, and so would the Foundation Future History, and there's lots of others. He mentioned a few other single standalone books to do this as well with, and I'm really looking forward to see what his thoughts are on all of these and how he compares them. But again, I envy anybody who reads this stuff for the first time now, because it's such a pleasure to come across that for the first time, and you never really can recapture that. You get other highs in for it, but it's the first time that really works, and the subsequent times are, you already know the general storyline, and you start seeing things deeper. You see connections and deeper, and also too, because these books are so uh, based on other things and other readings that you'll do, you will find. Anyway, I'm way going off topic here, but that's the science fiction book time. Get to know the SF reader tag, and if I haven't lost you from the beginning of my pedantic difference between SF, sci-fi, and fantasy and skiffy, and well, let's throw in other terms: scientification, scientifiction. I mean, that was done by Hugo Gernsback at the beginning of sort of the pulpy era in the 20s. He created that. Didn't last very long. Before that, for Wells, H.G. Wells, they were called scientific romances. which works for those. Actually, I think that does work. And then somebody's taken SF and just changed it to speculative fiction, but that covers too much stuff. That covers way too much ground, and it may have no science fiction element in it, and it would be speculative fiction. And then there's dystopias. There's it's all fun. And I'm not saying that the what I class as sci-fi, like Star Wars. Well, I don't care for Star Wars myself anyway, but a lot of stuff that I have read that would be under the sci-fi genre as how I define it, and I still find it enjoyable. I still find it enjoyable, but I draw a line and I have a distinction there. But anyway, I'll leave you there. I'm over 20 minutes, and I swore that I wasn't going to go over 15 for this tag. But anyway, I will see you next time, book tag. Yeah, well, I'll see you next time, book tag, hopefully with something, if I haven't done everything that I want to at this point. But anyway, take care, BookTube. Bye-bye.